What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel. And Anthony, what on earth is going on with the 4-9 Philadelphia Phillies? They've played 13 games. They're 5 games out of first place in the National League East. And before I kick it over to you, I will just say this. I tweeted it after the game last night, the loss against the Reds, a listless loss in which the Phillies showed little fight, little resistance. It was pathetic on all fronts. If there were a playbook to destroying all of the optimism about a new season, the Phillies have shown you exactly how to do it, exactly the path to do it in just 13 games. Are they cooked? Probably not. Is it too early to hit the panic button? I guess so. But my goodness, man, what a disaster this has been through 2 weeks.
Yeah, not good. It's really not been good. And yeah, like the loss yesterday to Cincinnati, that's the one that really bothers me, and it bothers me because I didn't like the loss, the extra inning loss to the Marlins. But at least in that one, you sit there and you can find things within the game and say, okay, one thing changes. It goes from a loss to a win, right? I mean, it was one of those. It's like, yeah, that sucks. But if one thing is different here or there, they win this game. Yesterday was a game there, other than the top of the first when they take a 1-0 lead. From that point forward, it looked like the Phillies had zero interest in being involved in the game. It looked like not only did they have zero interest, but that that everything that could go wrong kind of did or almost did, right? I mean, there was even talk about almost getting picked off on the bases again.
Yeah.
It didn't happen, but like the broadcast was talking. That's how bad it was. Like it was like they should have gotten thrown out on the base paths there if it weren't for a stupid play by Tyler Stevenson of the Reds. I mean, there wasn't anything redeeming about the game. Nothing. And so that's where to me, that's what bothers me. It doesn't matter that, you could lose a game, you could be 4-9. Those things happen. It's part of baseball, and you don't panic about it. But when you have a game like that coming off of a loss, coming off of a 3-3 homestand, that's where the concern lies for me.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I mean, last night in the Reds game to start this series against Nick Lodolo, the Phillies get out hot early, put a couple men on, score a run even. But even that, you couldn't feel great about it. You said like they missed a huge opportunity in the first inning to kind of hang a couple on them and maybe sort of change the entire feel of the game. And then you blink, it's the bottom of the first inning. India leads off with a double, tries to steal third base. Real Muto throws the ball chest high to Edmundo Sosa, ends up in left field, and it's 1-1 before you can even take a breath. I mean, this has been a sloppy product. It looks like an unfocused product. It's something that we've talked about on the show now numerous times. And you just mentioned the base running. Then you get to the bullpen. And I mean, listen, you're talking about a bullpen through 13 games that has a 6.38 ERA right now. Two of the darlings of spring training, McKinley Moore, Junior Marte, just brutal. And I know when you start doing like the hierarchy of issues with the Phillies bullpen, those are two guys that you're not really relying on all that much. They're in more of a mop-up role, but not a lot of bright spots there with these younger guys. Then you're looking at the Craig Kimbrells of the world who have been just an utter disaster to this point. I mean, Craig Kimbrell is really on the Corey Knebel path right now. Sign an older guy, $10 million, bring him in, make him the closer. He struggles. You wonder what's going on. You keep giving him some early season chances. He can't figure it out. And I think we're almost approaching this point now with Craig Kimbrell where they might have to do exactly what they tried to do with Knebel last year, which is back him up and reset him, put him in some lower leverage spots and try to, regain his confidence or let him regain his confidence. It's almost hard when you sit down and watch this on a daily or a nightly basis to pick one thing and say, this is what's holding this team back. They are just misfiring in so many different ways right now. You talked about the finale in the Marlins series being, okay, I guess, as you said, with losing that third game to the Marlins. Listen, I know we can do the calendar thing all we want, but the Marlins stink. And you had an opportunity to win that series and you didn't do it. And you started 0-5 or, 1-5. And you had a chance to sweep the Reds. You didn't do it. Then you play like crap last night. Like if you're a Phillies fan, and I know I said this last week, but there's this idea that you're like off your rocker, you're totally unhinged right now if you're frustrated or panicking about what you're seeing. I think it's entirely justified. Like, do I think the Phillies will be okay? I do. And I think we should probably talk about why they might be okay, and let people that are listening to this kind of give them something to hold on to. But if you're upset right now, you're nervous, you're angry, you're disgusted, any of those things, choose your adjective. I think it's entirely justified. This team has been dreadful through 2 weeks, just absolutely pathetic baseball.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely are justified to be mad and frustrated with the team as a fan. There's no reason to not be. Um, so go ahead, be annoyed, be pissed off
Thank
at
you.
be pissed off at the players for bad base running, be pissed off at the pitchers for not being ready to start the season, be at the manager for putting together unfathomable lineups and having odd pitching changes at the weirdest times, right? Be mad at all those things. It's okay. But don't sit there and cancel the season either, which a lot of people are already doing. Believe it or not.
I know.
You see it on Twitter, and I know Twitter's not the Twitter's more like the people who call into talk radio, right? It's only a very small percentage of the actual fan base, but you see it and when it starts to become noticeable, that means that there are more than just a handful of people who are being cranks, right? That are out there, and there are people who legitimately believe that this team's now not going to succeed this season, that their last year was lightning in a bottle, and that this team isn't very good. And I want to caution against that. I want to say, guys, pump those brakes, man. This isn't as bad as you think. It's bad, but not as bad as you think, and things will be okay. Just give it a little bit of time. Because we could look at, like you said, Bob, we could look at certain things. Like the team's hitting 280, right? Eventually, they're going to drive in runs. When you're hitting 280, eventually you're going to drive in runs. And the pitching can't be this bad. It just can't be this bad. I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, Wheeler and Nola are going to be better than they've been. I mean, Bailey Falter is about what a Bailey Falter is. He's not as bad as he was yesterday. He's also not as good as he was his first two starts. He's somewhere in between, and that's fine. Taijuan Walker, I need to see a nice game out of him. We talked about him last week. I want to see a nice game out of him today, kind of give me a little bit more confidence in him. And I do think that the bullpen will figure itself out. I mean, there's a couple guys of concern, but for the most part, I think the bullpen will be just fine. So, ultimately, when you really look at it, it's like, okay, this will get course corrected, but you can't put yourself in a hole. And that's what we keep talking about. Like, being 5 games out is a real thing right now. And that could easily snowball to 8, 9, 10 games, and you're not even in the division race anymore, and you're chasing wild cards again. That's not where you want to be.
It's truly remarkable. I mean, you mentioned the 280 team batting average, which, by the way, for context, we know that batting average across the board this season in Major League Baseball is up. But, I mean, the Phillies are 3rd in Major League Baseball right now in team batting average. They're 7th in team OPS at 776. So when you're top 10 in both average and OPS, which suggests you're doing, you're getting on base, you're doing some extra base damage, and then you're 24th in runs scored, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. And we know that this team has struggled to hit home runs. They still only have 12 home runs right now, bottom third of the league in home runs, but there have been plenty of doubles. Obviously, Nick Castellanos is probably the player that encapsulates that the most. But you think at some point something has to give. But at the same time, I guess my question to you would be this. You watch a team get on base. You watch a bunch of guys up and down the lineup get off the decent starts in terms of batting average. They're getting runners on, but they're not scoring. It just seems like it's a combination of their big time players not getting it done in key at bats, paired with getting runners on base and then having the absolute wrong guy, Christian Pache, by the way, just circle that. It feels like this guy's come up in every single at bat with 2 men on in a key spot. And I know that Christian Pache, by the way, has some hits this season. He hasn't been as bad probably as the fan base thinks he is, or, is reacting to him. But I think that the idea that he's playing right now over Brandon Marsh, who's off to a 387 start with an OPS north of 1,000, and you look out there and you see Christian Pache in key spots, it's frustrating. I think it kind of exaggerates the issue here and exaggerates that frustration.
Yeah, and I think what it's interesting to point to that, because it's showing you is that the guys who have been toward the bottom of the lineup have been the guys that have been good, right? I mean, that's because they're the ones who are on base when Christian Pache in the 9-hole keeps coming up with runners on base, right? But it's the guys at the top of the lineup who've been disappointing, and it's interesting, like, and we'll get into the individual players, being disappointing, especially a guy like Real Muto, who's absolutely killed the Phillies.
Yeah.
But I look at a guy like Trey Turner, for example, right? And if you look at his number, and this is where sometimes numbers can lie to you, and what you're watching actually tells the truth. When you look at Turner, he's hitting 316, right? I mean, he's got 18 hits, which is second on the team behind Bryson Stott, who's off to a historic start for the Phillies. And so you'd sit there and say, well, it's hard to criticize Trey Turner when he's doing exactly what you wanted to do. He's setting the table, right? But how many times has Trey Turner come up with a chance to drive in runs and not gotten the job done in a key spot? And to me, I think that's one where you sit there and go, okay, so yes, he's hitting, but not at the time you need him to hit. Right. And I think that the Phillies have a few situations like that where guys have come up in spots where you're like, okay, this is exactly who you want up there. And then they don't do what they're supposed to do. And you look at like a guy like Schwarber, who does have 4 home runs, which if you're projecting it out over the season, that's a 50 home run season, 4 homers in 13 games, right? He's on pace to hit 50 home runs, but he's hitting 196 and he struck out 17 times. And so therefore you sit there and say, well, why isn't Schwarber driving in guys when he's been up when guys on base, right? I mean, that's the frustration, right?
Yeah, they're doing a lot of good things at the wrong times. I mean, and then they're doing a lot of bad things at the wrong times, and that's what's really happened to this point. You mentioned Trey Turner hitting over 300. He has 3 runs batted in to this point. I mean, it just he has not made his production stand up, or the Phillies have not made his production stand up. Like, he either gets on, sets the table, they can't finish the deal, or he gets up in a spot where he can drive in runs and he can't finish the deal. And I mean, there's just been a lot of that this season. There really has been a lot of that. I think that this lineup, especially when you start talking about getting Bryce Harper back, and we could talk about the Matt Gelb report with Harper going to Rob Thomson and saying, I want to play first base. I can do that. I personally, I guess we're here. Let's just talk about it. Certainly getting Bryce Harper back, getting his presence back in the middle of this lineup is going to be a huge deal for this team. You just hope that that they remain afloat by the time it happens. And the way that this season is progressing right now, it's sort of on the brink of going off the rails. Like, we could sit here and say on April 14th, it's too early to panic. And you're right. But at the same time, if they double this up and they find themselves at 8 and 18 through 26 games, it's going to get early, or it's going to get late pretty early on here. So Bryce Harper coming back, like, I got to be honest with you. What am I missing with this story? I just don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, it's not going to get him it's not going to get him back in the lineup any sooner. So he's going to come back and be the DH. I guess it gets them a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they handle first base. This lets Alec Boehm go to third, and we feel good about that. Like, is this really that big of a deal?
Well, I'll tell you where it's a big. And first of all, let's really be honest about it. When Bryce Harper comes back May 19th, he's going to come back as a designated hitter, okay, and he's going to be a DH for a little bit. I mean, this is not like he's going to come back May 19th and then May 25th he's going to play first base. It's not. I honestly don't think it's that quick. Maybe I'm wrong, but I honestly don't think.
I think you're right. I think you have this sized up correctly.
Yeah, and so I think that you're looking at probably something where he's like, okay, well, look, we couldn't play right field until probably late August, maybe even September, because of the arm action that is needed to throw from the outfield and how much harder you have to throw from out there, and it's more over the top, right? Like, it's just like a pitcher, so it takes a little bit longer to come back from that after Tommy John. So if he can play first base and maybe you get there by July and you have a little bit of flexibility, then it gives Dombrowski the flexibility to go out and to assess what he has. Is Harper a viable first baseman? And if so, when you're going out to acquire what's needed for this team, that's where the flexibility is. Whereas if Harper can't do that and you have to leave him as the DH the entire time, then it kind of limits you where you can go get help, right?
Right.
I think having him play first base before the trade deadline really gives you the opportunity to add to this team in another spot and have guys move around and float the DH a little bit where it makes the lineup even better if that makes sense. I think that's the only benefit to it, and I don't think it's a big deal. Like you said, I don't think it's a big deal, but it is what it is, right?
Like, I don't think it changes the course of their season. I do get the flexibility idea here. I know that they're going to have to acquire another bat at some point. So the more optionality, like that word, bringing in a Sixers word here, but the more optionality that Dave Dombrowski has at the deadline, certainly the better. My main takeaway from it is the willingness of Harper to do this. No, if the story is true that nobody said to him, Bryce, would you think about it? And he's out there willing to do it and saying, I will do anything I can to try to get this team right, and I'm going to do anything I can to try to get this team in a better spot. Then I commend that. And you can sit there and say, well, they're paying the guy $25 million a year. And of course he should do whatever he can to help the team win. But I think that this says something about the player. And I think that one of the things when they signed him 4 or 5 years ago, there was this idea that he was a selfish player, that he wasn't a team guy. And what's he going to do for a clubhouse culture? And there were some question marks about that. This idea of selfishness that kind of followed him around in Washington. And we've known now for years that hasn't been the case. We know that he's been an organization first guy, a team first guy. I think this is just the latest example of that. You kind of hope that players, this might sound corny and I might be totally off base here. It's early and I haven't had my full coffee yet, but I'd like to think that players in the clubhouse get that news or know that he's willing to do it and say like, hell yeah, man. Like if Bryce Harper's willing to do that, if he's willing to try something different to help us win, like I feel like that sets a tone. I feel like that there's something a little bit contagious about that. Now, it sure as hell hasn't shown up on the field to date, but I do think that there's something from an intangible standpoint that's positive about it.
I agree. I mean, I don't look at this as a negative. I don't look at this as they're rushing him back. I don't look at this as anything that you can kind of skew negative. I think it's all good, right? In every aspect, from Harper taking on, a leadership type role and being that guy who really wants to inspire the rest of the team, say, I'm going to come back and get this thing fixed, to the Phillies being open to it, right? And say, you know what? Yeah, let's consider this. Let's, we want to be better and we'll leave no stone unturned to find a way to make sure that we're better. So there's nothing negative about this at all. It's all positive. So, and I know some people are wondering how does this happen? How does a guy get this close to coming back this quickly? And look, I'm not a doctor. It's hard for me to say. And the only thing I will I'll say is this. The Phillies have so much money invested in Bryce Harper for a long time. They are not going to put him into a position where he's going to come back and be at risk of re-injuring himself, the same injury, right? I mean, obviously anything can happen. An injury can happen at any point. But they're not going to bring a guy back and put him at risk when they have that kind of investment in him. Because if he was to re-injure the elbow and need Tommy John surgery a second time, he would have to miss almost another year. And that's not, so they're not going to put him in that position. So anybody who's worried that, he's rushing back and coming back too soon, and oh my God, what are they doing? They're only doing this because they're 4-9. No, they're not. He's healing at the rate that he's healing. He's got the best doctor in maybe the world for this surgery, who did this surgery and who is going to be the one who ultimately decides when he can come back and when he can play, Dr. Neil Trash out in LA. And the team's investment in him is going to make 100% sure that he is safe to come back. So don't think that there's anything nefarious. When he comes back, he will be ready to go.
Someone asked me the other day, does this team give you 2012 Red Sox vibes? And just if you're listening to this and you don't know what that question means, in 2011 the Red Sox went 90-72. They were a quality team, obviously a 90-win team. We haven't seen a 90-win team here in over a decade. In 2012, they come back and they win 69 games, and it's a disaster. And the following year, they win 97 games. And the Red Sox have actually done this a couple times over the last decade where they've had a really good year, and then there's been this big step back. It's been a disaster. And then they come and they rebound and they have a good year after that. Is there any chance that this is a good team, the Phillies? They have a lot of talent. The pieces are there. It could just be one of those years where they just cannot get on track. They just can't get it going. They get off to this slow start. They never recover. It doesn't mean that they're screwed long term. It doesn't mean that there isn't a bright future, but that this year might just be wrecked. I mean, that Rhys Hoskins goes down, Derek Hall goes down, Bryce Harper misses a month and a half, 2 months. They just can't overcome it.
I mean, anything's possible. And yeah, I mean, sure, it could fit that mold. And it's not just the Red Sox. I mean, I think if you go back through the annals of sports, you always find teams that have a really good year, maybe an unexpected finish, and then have a step back year before they bounce back again and are really good again. And it's not like a flash in the pan. You know, it's not the 93 Phillies where it's a one and done and then they're not good for a long time again. It could be a situation where they're still within their window and just happen to have a bad year. Those things happen in sports. I don't think this team's going to be that. I don't think this is going to be a complete meltdown year where they, lose 90 games. But I do think it's certainly conceivable and understandable for someone to think about that, especially considering the challenges that they've had coming into the season and the start that they've gotten off to.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason why I asked this question is because I think right now most fans are trying to figure out, how should I feel about this team? Now, if you listen to this show or any other podcast, none of us can predict what's going to happen over the last 149 games of the regular season. Right. It's impossible. I don't know. If I did, I would have like the almanac from Back to the Future, right?
You wouldn't be here.
I would not be here. I would not be doing this. I promise you that. But I think that what most fans are going through right now is this struggle of, I bought into this team this offseason. I fell in love with this team last October. They go out and they sign Trey Turner. They're all in. The organization's committed to winning, and I'm so excited about what's to come. And then everything has gone wrong, whether it is the Rhys Hoskins injury, the Bryce Harper, not setback. I mean, we knew what we were getting into coming into this season with him in the timetable. If anything, the news has probably been good there. But the Ranger Suarez setbacks, the Andrew Painter setbacks, Derek Hall goes down. There's been a lot that has gone wrong for this team. And I think a lot of people are probably sitting there right now just going, this doesn't feel like the 2022 Phillies. This feels like all of the other Phillies teams from the past decade. Here we go again. And okay. So let me ask you this.
Well, let me say this though, before you ask me that question. This doesn't feel like the 2022 Phillies. Well, yeah, it doesn't feel like the 2022 Phillies from June to October, but sure as hell feels like the 2022 Phillies of April, doesn't it?
It sure does. I mean, they entered last night. I don't know what they did in their 13th game, but they entered last night with the identical record through 12 games that they had in 2022, which was 4-8. And listen, I've covered this team the last number of years. I covered that team last spring and into Memorial Day. And I know that the switch got flipped when Rob Thomson took over at the beginning of June with that Angels series. They sweep the Angels and they just never looked back. But I guess my question to you is this. If they don't recover, what does it look like? Because we're going to sit here in a little bit and talk about how it's okay. And Bryce Harper comes back and Ranger Suarez comes back. And there's too many good quality arms in the back end of that bullpen for this unit to pitch to a 6.38 ERA and be a bottom 5 bullpen. And there's too much talent between Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler at the top of the rotation, and too much depth when they get guys like Sanchez back and Falter's back. And here comes Painter, and they have all of these different options. There's just too much here. It can't go wrong. Well, what does it look like if it does go wrong? Is it just this for 6 months?
No, I see. I don't think it. So that's the thing. I think this is I think this is as bad as it can get, right? I don't think you're going to continue to see this downward spiral of a team that's just going to implode on itself. I do not think you're going to see. Now, is it possible that they start to win a little bit, but they don't win enough, and then they end up being kind of mediocre and hover around 500, and you think that they're going to they're going to make that push for that last playoff spot, and they kind of hang in, and then in the end of the year that they don't quite get there, and you get disappointed and frustrated, and here we are again, and maybe 22 was just it was just that one year that they got lucky and special and everything else. I mean, that I think is a more realistic possibility than this team's going to be bad all year like this. I just don't see this being a full season thing. I think this is a bad start by a team that's far better than they've played, and they will figure it out. The question will be, will they figure it out in time to contend in the National League East, or does it take so long that all of a sudden the only thing that they can compete for is one of the last wild card spots? And that's where you really got to ask yourself the question. And I don't think that any of us really know. And I think that's the spot that it's like, okay, let's wait and see, because that's where my uncertainty is at this point. I don't know how quickly they can get back to where they need to be. I do believe they will. I just don't know how fast it's going to happen.
I think you and I are both big believers in that players play. It's up to the players to produce. But we could have sat here a year ago and said, listen, it's not Joe Girardi's fault. These guys they don't know how to win. They've never shown a propensity to win. They don't know how to win. They don't have enough. This team is flawed. And then they change managers, and then they go on this magical ride. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think through 13 games, coming into this season, you think to yourself, wow, Rob Thomson he did a remarkable job in 2022. Through 2 weeks this season, I don't think that the fan base, just trying to take the pulse of the fans here, I don't think that the fan base is quite so enamored with the job that Rob Thompson's done through 2 weeks. And so what I want to talk about here is, to what degree does he deserve blame for what has transpired through 13 games? And there's two different lenses I think that we can look at this through. One is lack of preparation. They seemingly are unfocused right now. They seemingly do have pitchers that just are not ready at this point in the season. And then there have been some curious decisions with bullpen usage. There have been some very curious decisions with lineups. These lineups actually do remind me quite a bit of some of the lineups that we saw with Gabe Kapler and Joe Girardi. We know that this is an organizational thing at the end of the day. I mean, I think that needs to be acknowledged. But last year it felt like, hey, Bryson Stott's a guy that we're going to lean into. He's our guy. He's going to play every day. And when he came in, he brought that stability with him. And now Bryson Stott is playing every day. And hell, he's hitting leadoff for this team now. But you look at a guy like Brandon Marsh, and we see what's happening with Christian Pache, Brandon Marsh. We see some of the, instability between third base and first base. And obviously that's been born and necessitated because of injury. But what do you think about Rob Thomson at this point? Too early to tell, or are there some real criticisms that are valid here?
I think it was very smart of you to qualify this in two separate lenses, because I think one is a very valid lens, and I think the other one not yet. And so the very valid lens is the preparation for the season, and you got to be a little concerned. And I know, look, he's talked about it, and he said, look, we had so many guys at World Baseball Classic. So they were training, but they weren't training with us. They weren't, in our routine. They weren't getting as many at bats or as many innings as we would have given them. They weren't on our schedules, and they weren't working with our guys. And that's kind of important. I mean, and I do agree with him in that regard, but at the same time, these are professional athletes. Okay. And these are the best players in the game. We're not talking about Joe Schmo back end of the rotation or of the bullpen or the last guy on the bench kind of guys, right? We're talking about star players. And so if they're not where they need to be, and I don't think you can just sit there and go, oh, well, they weren't in camp with us, and so that's why. Like, I have a hard time buying that as far as their individual preparation. I get it with the cohesiveness, and maybe you're a little off there, and I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. But as far as individual preparation, like JT Realmuto should not be coming into this season hitting 205, grounding into double plays every time that he comes up with runners in scoring position. Like, I mean, these things should not be happening. And yet they are. And we already talked about Turner, same thing, right? And Schwarber, we talked about these guys. But I don't buy into the whole, and you know me, I'm a guy who likes a consistent lineup, right? And here I am, I'm going to defend the guy for doing something a little bit different every game. I think that when you have the hole that was created so late in spring training with losing Hoskins, you then have to figure it out. You have to try things. And they didn't really have the time to experiment with that much in spring training, right? So they have to try and find what the best course of action is as far as the lineup is concerned. And so in that regard, I don't mind juggling a little bit early. I do want to see it get consistent. And I do think that's why I say to me, it's not a valid criticism now. It can be eventually, but I think right now it's still in that figure it out mode, and that's okay. And the same thing with the pitching, but at the same time, I've questioned a few pitching decisions that he's made. I also got to wonder, like, if they're not ready, and again, it would be his and his staff's fault that they're not ready. But if they're not ready, do you have to manage this differently, and do you have to do it kind of the way he's doing it, even if it's not something that you or I would do? And so to me, that's another one where I feel like, let's see if it continues. If it continues to be a problem, then yeah, we'll criticize the hell out of him. But I'm not quite ready to do it just yet in that regard. So I think there's two different lenses. Yes, one, I think you could spotlight on the manager and the staff and the organization. The other one, not quite yet. I think it's a little bit of an overreaction in the moment.
How do you explain what's happened with the base running? And I know how Rob Thomson explains it, which is it's guys are pressing, they're trying to do too much, they're trying to make something happen. The reason why I ask this is because, as a guy that used to coach, high school baseball coach for 12 years, varsity head coach for 5 years, I had a team 4 years ago that was phenomenal. It was just a great group of guys. I trusted them so much. It was like having 6 or 7 coaches on the field with me. Some of them weren't even terribly talented. Like they were fine. They were more like grinders, but they just every instinct, every urge, right? They knew how to do it, when to do it. They were awesome. You come back the next year, a lot of those guys come back and you want to trust them the same way. You want to give them the same amount of respect. They almost earn that respect when they play that well. You win 20 games, you get to a group final, you lose by a run with 1 out in the last inning. And you just say, like, I trust these guys to do the right thing. I'm not going to be on their ass quite so hard here. I'm going to let them do their thing. We proved together last year that our formula, our recipe, it works. And then the next year, it didn't go quite as well. It was still okay, but there were some leaks that were starting to spring, and I kind of felt like, man, maybe I should have been on them a little bit more from the start. Maybe I should have held them a little bit more accountable from the start. And I wonder, I'm not sitting here trying to compare the 2023 Philadelphia Phillies to a South Jersey high school varsity baseball team. That would be ridiculous. But I do wonder if there's any sense of, hey, we've got this. We've had slow starts before. We know that there's a formula to get back on track. And look at what we did last October. And do you think that that's at all kind of contributed to this? I don't think it's complacency, but this lack of focus, whatever the hell this is.
It's hard to describe, and I think you've got you've got your finger on the button here, because I don't think it's a complacency. I don't think it's a I think it's more overconfidence than anything else, right? If you're really trying to describe it, it's like they got to a point last year where they needed to get to, and we all wanted them to get to, and they finally did what we've been waiting for them to do, and they got into the playoffs, and that was the breaking of the dam, and then everything that they did, everything they touched turned to gold for 6 weeks, right? It was awesome. And they ran the bases well. They played good defense for the most part, right? They were hitting in clutch situations. And so it was a belief in themselves that just was born out of the finally having success. And so I think what happens is you come into this season And yes, expectations are higher, and that's great. But that confidence now maybe is a little bit too much, especially early on, where you're trying. And when you say they're trying to do too much, I think that's what it is. I think it's like, well, we could do this because we did it last year. Like we showed we could do this. So I'm going to take that extra base, even if I probably shouldn't, or I'm going to be really aggressive here, even though I really shouldn't be that in this case, and I think that kind of thing permeates, and maybe you need a little bit of comeuppance. And in the case of, a sobering start like 4-9, maybe that is like, okay, pump the brakes a little bit here. We could do these things, but we got to pick our spots as opposed to being this way 150 miles per hour at all times. And I think that's the only explanation you can have for it. Because I don't think that these are stupid players, and I don't think that these are players who lack fundamentals. I just think that this is a situation where they had gotten to a point where in their heads they could do no wrong, and now they are making mistakes because of that.
Is there anything to the idea that this is a wholly mediocre team that has been completely mediocre for 5 years, and for 1 month they really just, or 6 weeks, as you said, they figured it out? Like, you go back and you look at the way that the 2022 season unfolded, and I know that the revisionist will look at it and say, well, Rob Thomson became the manager right around Memorial Day, and my God, they were so good from there on out. But like, if you remember, there were a lot of periods in August, in September, where they stumbled, and it looked like it was going to be the same old Phillies. You go back and look at the attendance late in the season, some really important games. There was a moment where Kyle Schwarber grabbed the mic, and he's talking to the fans at Citizens Bank Park about, we're going to try to get back here. We're going to try to do it. The seats are totally blue, totally empty. Like, I think that a lot of people remember or think about 2022 like it was this great team. Everyone was bought in from the start, and that's not true. I mean, that team struggled for a good deal of the season, and then everything, like you said, everything they touched, it turned to gold. Is it just possible that they are just this mediocre team? They're an 81 win team, and the magic is gone.
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible, right? But I don't buy it, and I don't buy it because if you're looking again, when you look at it, you are seeing progression from players who you wanted to see progression from.
But this is you just took exactly what I was going to say, and I'll let you go. But you're getting everything that you could possibly want from the question marks coming into this season, and you're still off to this start.
Well, and that's my point. So what I'm saying is so the question marks are answering your question, and they're answering it in a positive way. It's the guys who you didn't have questions about that aren't doing what they're supposed to do, and so you sit there and say, well, these guys have to be. These guys have to bounce back and be themselves, right? I mean, you're not going to go an entire season of mediocrity from, Turner, Schwarber, Real Muto. At least you hope you're not. You think those guys are going to be good. You're not going to have mediocrity from Wheeler and Nola. Or at least you hope you won't. Or you expect these guys to kind of come back and bounce back. So I mean, when you look at it, if they're right now your top 5 players, like if you take Harper out of the equation, and I say to you, who were the 5 biggest names on this team coming into this season? I just named them for you: Turner, Real Muto, Schwarber, Nola, Wheeler, and none of them have really contributed greatly to anything this season. So they're the 5 biggest name players who haven't really done anything to help this team win, or at least done enough to help this team win. It's everyone else who's played well. So you got to assume that with the progression of Bohm and Stott and Marsh, that once these 5 guys kind of get their heads together and get going in the right direction, then yeah, it's going to turn around. And you're right about last year. You're right about 2022. I mean, yes, if you look from the time Thomson took over, everybody always says, well, their record from June 1st on was 3rd best in baseball or whatever the hell it was. But they also did struggle down the stretch. They were a 500 team for over a month, in late August and through the end of the year. So it was a really great stretch at the beginning of the Thomson era, and then it became a mediocre team. That said, I think this team is better. It's more talent. They just haven't resulted in wins yet. So do I think it's just a mediocre team? I don't. I think there's too many good players, and I think when you add Harper and then Suarez comes back, assuming he's healthy, I think that the team gets even that much better, and I think that you're fine. So I don't think it's a mediocre team, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate to positive results unless they start getting their heads out of their ass in a lot of ways.
So here we are, and the Phillies are 4-9. We are talking about all these reasons for concern, reasons for optimism, trying to walk this line here where we acknowledge the reality, but also don't want to cancel the season. One of the players that has really hurt this team, and I know that we focus on guys like Aaron Nola. We've talked about some of the bullpen issues, the inconsistencies in the lineup, but one guy that I don't think we've really called out or singled out by name is JT Realmuto. JT Realmuto is 2 for his last 21. He's hitting 205 with a 586 OPS to date, and much like last year, especially early on in the year, it felt like every time that JT Realmuto came up with men on base or an important spot, he could not have thrown the ball up to himself and hit it out to shortstop with a fungo any better. It's like automatic double play. And the only time that he isn't hitting into a double play is when the Reds botch it or a team botches it. I mean, he has been now for the bulk of this season pretty brutal. How concerned are you about JT Realmuto at this point? We know that it happens fast with catchers. We also know that JT Realmuto is in immaculate shape. He's strong as an ox. He's gotten off the slow starts before, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But do we feel like maybe this is the year? Because I'm seeing the reason why I bring this up is because I try to talk about things that I know that the fans are talking about. And I open up Twitter and I'm seeing a lot of skepticism about JT Realmuto's game right now, which is surprising to me, frankly. So I'm just kind of curious on what your early take is of his game.
Again, it's hard to justify complaining or identifying a collapse of a catcher based off of 11 games, which he's only played in 11.
Right, 11, yeah.
Yeah, because Stubbs played the others. So, I mean, I can't sit there and say, oh, yeah, JT Realmuto, he's done after 11 games. And because we saw it last year, he was regular season, the team's MVP last year, bar none, right? But we were talking in May, it was late May, that was last year the season where it hit quick and it turned, you know what I'm saying? So he has the propensity to be this guy who can get it back and get it fixed and get it right. But when your OPS plus is worse than Christian Pache, which it is right now, his OPS plus is 55, Pache 77. Okay, so it tells you just how poor of a start he's had. And even worse to me is, and he's never been a real on-base guy or a guy that takes a lot of walks, but he's really not seeing the ball. He's got 17 strikeouts. He's walked once. That's a pretty bad, right? That's a pretty bad strikeout to walk ratio.
A lot of strikeouts, a lot of bad ground ball contact. It's
I mean, I think he's a little bit too over aggressive, and I think that Real might actually be better suited to be, take a breath, be a little bit more patient at the plate. And you know what? Maybe he's a guy that you drop down in the lineup, you leave him a little bit further, and just say, figure it out down there. You're going to play every day. We know it. You're our guy. You're, BCIB, right? So, I mean, you're going to be there. So maybe it's a guy that, hey, just move him down, let him figure it out in a much more lower leverage spot in the lineup. And then once it starts to click, then you can, move him back up as needed. But ultimately it is a problem right now. But I don't know if it's going to manifest itself as something that's going to be a problem all season. I just don't see that just yet with Realmuto.
His start is a microcosm for the Phillies start. And if you're an optimist, you're going to point to the team's trajectory of a year ago, to JT Realmuto's trajectory of a year ago, which, I think it is worth noting, through 39 games last year, he hit 238 with a 655 OPS. Now, granted, his numbers are worse than that right now. That would be a market improvement at this point. But this is a guy that I just trust. I think that he does figure it out. I think that you do some of the things that maybe you just talked about. But I cannot write off a player or even express a great deal of concern about what I'm seeing from a player through that amount of time. A guy that I just watched do this a season ago, no less. Now, Craig Kimbrell, on the other hand, maybe there's some real concern there. You're talking about a guy that was left off the Dodgers playoff roster last year. Let me before we get to that, I want to hit on one other thing, and I also want to get to Bryson Stott too. We have to talk about Bryson Stott and what he's done through 13 games. Aaron Nola, you and I have had these spirited Aaron Nola debates over the years, and for those of you that are new to the show, Anthony thinks that Aaron Nola is just a peg below Nolan Ryan. No, I'm just kidding. But Anthony certainly is in the camp that Aaron Nola is one of the game's elite pitchers. I'm not a hater, but I am definitely in the camp of he's pretty good. I don't know that I think he's quite that good. It has been a bad start for him. You can sugarcoat numbers and we can talk about small sample sizes all we want. It's been 3 starts. Again, much like Real Muto, there is a track record of success here. So I can't be a total hypocrite and tell you, oh man, you should be super concerned about Aaron Nola. But I do think that his start warrants a discussion. It's been pretty ugly and it does not inspire much confidence. And with the backdrop of this contract situation and the uncertainty regarding his future, what is your assessment of Aaron Nola through 3 starts? I have to tell you, he looks like a guy right now to me that is pitching with no flow, no feel, no confidence. And I know that he is fully capable of turning it around, but boy, oh boy, guy looks like he's costing himself some money at the moment.
Yeah, he does look like he's costing himself a little bit of money. And again, I'm again the patient guy, right? So I think that you still give all these players time, and I think Nola is another one there. I was concerned with how things went in his last start against the Marlins, and because I thought he pitched well. I was at the game in New York that he pitched against the Yankees, and I really thought it was a very well pitched game. I thought that the Yankees had 2 hits off him that were legit, a single by Judge and a double by LeMahieu, and that was it. I thought he really pitched well against them. Of course, he had a walk in the 7th inning that ultimately comes around to score after the bullpen lets it in, and that goes against him as well. But I thought that start was more of an Aaron Nola start. The Marlins game, I thought it was a typical thing that the people who don't like Aaron Nola complain about. He was cruising, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. And it was like it just hit you all at once. And there was a little bit of bad luck in there, but you can't blame it all on bad luck.
Doesn't it always feel like that, though? Doesn't it kind of almost always feel like that?
That's what I was about to say. You can't always blame it on bad luck. I mean, it certainly was there. I mean, you recognize it. But and I say to people, look, you gave it 5 hits in that inning. Okay, one of them was bad luck, because he should have had Segura struck out and didn't, and then ends up getting a hit, and so maybe that 4th run that he allowed in that inning probably should have scored, but that doesn't excuse the other 4 hits and the other 3 runs, right? I mean, it really just doesn't. I mean, that's what I'm saying. The rest of the inning can't snowball, and that's where my concern is when he has those innings. And after the game, we asked him about it, and he said, I feel like I've had 2 bad innings all season. Well, that's not a good enough answer to me, right? I mean, it's just not. It may be true. He had 1 bad inning in Texas and 1 bad inning against the Marlins, and the other 13 have been pretty vintage Aaron Nola, but that doesn't justify it, right? I mean, that doesn't say, well, okay, so if 2 out of every 15 innings is going to be bad, you're probably not going to have a good season. Right. I don't think that's a good enough excuse. And maybe, that's the thing you have to say. You have to focus on the positives, and, you'll figure it out and get going in the right direction. But you're right, Bob. This has not been a good start of the season for Nola. And he needs to, over the course of the next 2 to 3 starts, really start to look like himself, or else then we can have that red flag up and wave it proudly that there could be a problem here.
There's always this balance between looking at the numbers, trying to be a stat guy, trying to be a little bit of a progressive thinker, and understanding that there's a mathematical, analytical way to approach your observation of baseball, but then there's also that feel approach. Mm-hmm. And I can't help, because the reason why I say this is because there is an acknowledgement that pitcher wins is just maybe the most overrated, worthless stat in all of baseball. And I understand that. I'd rather have a guy that has a 2.12 ERA and his team doesn't hit on a given night and he doesn't win the game or he gets a loss than a guy that has an ERA in the mid threes or low fours, but he walks away as a 16-game winner somehow, So we know that wins are kind of a flawed stat, but I think there's also something to be said for the fact that you look at his win-loss totals and you look at what's happened recently here. NLCS, loss. World Series, his first start in the World Series, loss. Second World Series start, loss. Texas this season, loss. Yankees, loss. Marlins, loss. 6 straight losses.
Actually, the first World Series game they
came back. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So it's 5 in a row. It's 5 in a row.
Yeah.
So you look at this though, and you start to wonder, like, is there a valid criticism in there of his game where you say, like, sometimes we just need you to be better than you were. Like, you can't ask a guy to go through 7 shutout innings every game. You can't ask a guy to consistently overcome a lack of run support. But sometimes my feeling with him, just his whole body of work, when it's all said and done, say this is his last season in Philadelphia, I think the way that I'm going to view him and remember him is this. It's like, he is a very good pitcher, an all-star level pitcher. He, I think, made good on the hype, like the expectation of what he would be in a Phillies uniform. Like, I think that Aaron Nola has met the expectation of what people thought he would be when he arrived here. But I'm always left wanting a little bit more from him. And I've just had these periods, sometimes prolonged periods, where I've just felt a little bit underwhelmed by him. Maybe it is the inability to stop things from snowballing. It's the inability to just say, you know what? I see the momentum getting away from me. I'm just going to drop the hammer and, screw it. I'm going to handle it. I just feel a little bit underwhelmed by him. And I've certainly felt underwhelmed by what I've seen from him this season.
I mean, look, you're not going to get an argument from me as far as, what you're getting right now. I have a different perspective on his overall, body of work, but that's okay. I mean, I get it. I mean, it's not like you're sitting there and just, criticizing him just to criticize him. Right? I mean, the criticisms that you have are fair. And I think that when you look at it, that those things are legitimate criticisms, but I think that they are also criticisms that can be given to many pitchers that we don't hear them, but we hear them on Nola. And why do we hear them on Nola? And why is it so cacophonous on Nola? And it's really because it's the same thing that we talked about with Rhys Hoskins, is because this is a homegrown player who's been here for a long time, who we've been told for a long time is going to be a part of this Phillies renaissance, that whenever they fail, the spotlight is sharper than it is on anybody else. And that's fair or not, that's what it is. And they have to operate within that spotlight. And sometimes Aaron Nola has not been at his best in that harsher spotlight. And actually is I think pitches better when the spotlight isn't really turned on him, which is a thing, right? And that's if I'm going to find my biggest criticism of him, it's and it's not that he can't pitch in big games. That's not what I'm saying, because he has proven that he can. And statistically, I wrote a whole thing showing everybody how that's not a true narrative. But I do think that when it's more intense as far as everybody looking at him specifically, and not necessarily the magnitude of the game, I think that is where Nola struggles the most. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's a thing that, it's weighing on him that he's pitching for a contract right now. And that is the spotlight that's on him, and it's not that it's a big game against this pitcher or whatever the case might be, but rather something else that he's thinking for himself, for his future, that is weighing on him a little bit more.
Your criticism, or your note about why fans criticize him to a harsher degree than maybe some other players is interesting. What I find interesting, and this happens with a number of players, and I think Rhys Hoskins falls into this as well, where it feels like some people unfairly criticize him, and then there's another group of fans that just go to great lengths to defend a player. And I feel like that's what we get with Aaron Nola. Like, again, social media, Twitter is not necessarily reflective of the way the entire fan base feels. But when you look at an Aaron Nola start, like his most recent start against the Marlins, there are people that are like, this guy is a fraud. Like, I mean, there is that mentality out there that this is all nonsense, that he's a middle of the rotation guy. He's kind of been, pumped up to be this top of the rotation ace level pitcher. He's just not that. And I mean, I totally do not agree with that, by the way, just to be clear. But then there are people that are like, he is elite. He is a top 7 pitcher in Major League Baseball. If you don't see the brilliance of Aaron Nola, then you don't know baseball. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Like, that's where you lose me. Like, I just can't go that far. Like, why do you think it is that a player like Aaron Nola is so divisive? Like, you mentioned why he gets the criticism, but then why do you think that it's because he's a homegrown guy and he has helped turn this thing around and he's a nice guy? Like, why does he get that support? That's such extreme support that I think is kind of just ridiculous, frankly. Like, why can't there just be like an honest conversation about the guy?
Yeah, and I think that the ultimately there's many reasons that it could be that, but I think ultimately the most generic one that probably covers most of the defenders of Aaron Nola is the fact that they are loyal fans who will always support their team no matter what, and will go out of their way to defend a guy who's been a good pitcher for them for a good period of time, and doesn't like it feels like that the negative focus on him is unfair. And I think that's your predominant people who will defend him and look at it that way. I think that there is a group of people who, and I probably fall more into this category, where I compare him to the rest of baseball statistically, and I look at it and say it's hard to argue where he plays out. You could look at start to start and say, yeah, this start wasn't great, or this start was really great, or whatever. I mean, you can look at it from start to start, but when you bring in the totality of it and you compare it to everybody else in baseball, he is top 15 season after season after season. And so that's the argument that I personally make when I'm defending Aaron Nola, right? So I think there are two different camps for it. But I do think that your majority of fans who are defending out of loyalty to the Phillies and the fact that he's been here for so long and he's been part of their conversation for since he was drafted, right? I mean, so I think that's probably your biggest block of defenders.
I know that we're kind of pushing up against an hour here. I know we want to talk about Bryson Stott. I said I wanted to get to Craig Kimbrell real quick, so let's try to make it quick on Kimbrell. Yep. But what's your overall takeaway from what you've seen from him? I see a guy that fastball velocity is okay. I think the off-speed breaking stuff has been brutal. I think that's what's killed him. What do you do with him at this point? Like, how do you play Craig Kimbrell if you're the Phillies right now?
I think that you made a great comparison to Corey Knebel. I mean, I think it's exactly what he's been. And Knebel did have like a quick, bounce back at one point early last year before he got hurt, and then we never heard from him again. So you got to hope that he gets that breaking ball worked out, because I mean, I guess the game we were at, Bob, I mean, he was bouncing at 52 feet, right? I mean, it was ugly. So yeah, if he could get his breaking ball on point, I still think he can help this bullpen, but I don't think you give it a lot of time. I really don't. I think you say, hey, go out there in a couple more lower leverage situations, figure it out, see if you can get it right. And if you do, then we'll start bringing you back to the back end. And if not, I think you cut bait quick. I mean, that's what I would do. Whether or not the Phillies take that path, we'll see.
Were you surprised that we saw him in the 10th inning against the Marlins on Wednesday?
A little bit. I was more surprised at the fact that look, you kind of expect a run to score from second base, in my mind, with the rule of having the ghost run or whatever the hell you want to call it, on second. My expectation is always that run should score, no matter who it is, whether visiting team, home team, doesn't make a difference. My expectation is that run's going to score. How do you get the other run? To me, that's how you should be thinking. And if you're the home team, if that run scores and that's the only run that scores for the visitor, you need to tie the game. And so it's like, to me, the bigger question I had in that game was not that Craig Kimbrell came in and gave up that run, but that why you don't move the runner to third base to give yourself a better chance of getting that run home to tie it, and then See if you can get
And
the second one. If not,
who was up to not move? Who did not move the runner
it
over?
was Christian Pache, which and we know he can bunt. They had him bump before, so like why not? Like I don't know. That was my criticism of the manager there. I mean, I in that moment, like I know we didn't want to talk about it. It was a couple games ago, but man, that bothered me more than Craig Kimbrell coming in the 10th inning.
Yeah, amazing stuff. All right, well, let's end it on a positive note and get to Bryson Stott. You know, when we talk about Bryson Stott, and we've done this for probably 2 seasons now, we always use these words like gritty, and he's a grinder and has a feel for the game, and he knows how to work at bats. We could probably stop saying all of that now and just say the guy is just good. He's just a good baseball player. He's a good hitter. He's a good defensive player. He has met and surpassed almost any projection or expectation of his game to this point. I guess I wrote it the other day. You know, we talked about now he has a 13-game hitting streak. He's hit safely in every game so far this season. He has 9 multi-hit games this month alone because he did have a hit in the opener against Texas, but it was in March and it was only 1 hit. 9 multi-hit games. He hit the 20-hit mark in his 12th game. He did it on April 12th. Last year, he did not pick up his 20th hit until the middle of June. It took him 104 at-bats last season to get his 20th hit. He did it in 46 at-bats this season. He has been unbelievable. He has been probably, other than Nick Castellanos, he's been the one bright spot of what we've seen early on here.
Yeah, I mean, really has. And, you know, and I don't forget Brandon Marsh. I think Marsh has been a bright spot too.
When he plays.
When he plays. Although he's, you know, been in 11 of the 13 games. Yeah, I mean, I think Stott's been great. I do think that they caved a little bit to the pressure of putting him at the top of the lineup. Not that he shouldn't be there, but against lefties. I mean, he did yesterday, and I didn't think he looked all that great in the game. I mean, he gets the bunt base hit in the 9th inning to extend the hitting streak. But I do think that there's a reason that they were batting him down in the lineup, and I kind of question, you know, why that they felt the need to really do it against a lefty like Lodolo, who they said is so tough on left-handers, and then all of a sudden you're putting a lefty right at the top. So like I'm a little.
Are you okay with him hitting leadoff against right-handers right
yes,
now?
1,000%. 1,000%. Oh, yes. And I'm not saying he should be out of the lineup against a lefty. I just worry about, you know, it depends on who the lefty is. If it's a lefty who's a soft tossing lefty, I don't mind having Stott lead off. But if you have a power left-handed pitcher like Lodolo, I like, to me, that's a guy that, you know, maybe you keep Stott in the lineup, but you bat him down. But yeah, no, he's great. I think he's great. I think he's been, you know, he's a guy. He's one of the guys, and I think that he's going to develop. Look, we've heard, Bob, this isn't anything surprising. Like, we've heard people say this guy's going to win a batting title one day. You know, oh, this guy's going to be an all-star one day. And it's just happening a little bit faster than maybe I think everybody kind of thought or hoped, that that's a positive for the Phillies. So, I mean, it's real. I would believe it. I mean, he's not going to hit 400 which he's hitting right now, but can he be a 310, 320 hitter? Sure, I think so.
Big start for Taijuan Walker tonight. You give a guy $72 million or whatever it was. I think it was $72 million over 4 years. Is it too much to ask of Mr. Walker to go out tonight as a 150 favorite and handle a bad Reds lineup and outpitch Connor Overton? Can we handle that? This is a big start for him tonight, man. This is a really big game.
And I'll be honest with you, it's really been about the fact that he's been wild. He's got 8 walks in 9 innings. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, he's not giving up a lot of hits. He's only giving up 7 hits, right? And he's striking guys out. He's got 10 strikeouts. So like, the things that you want out of a pitcher, he's giving you, except for the fact that he's been a little all over the place.
Right.
So, I mean, if he could cut down on the walks, which will then cut down on the pitches, which then would give him length in the game, then I think that your Taijuan Walker will be fine. But that's the thing he's got to do. He's got to find the strike zone. He can't be all over the place. And if he is, again, and the bullpen's got to come in the 5th inning again, then it's a problem. But if he could cut down on the walks, I think Taijuan Walker will be just fine. Look, I don't want to tell anybody to bet on the Phillies, but I mean, I got to think that this is a game. I got to think this is a matchup that works, right? This is a matchup that works for them, and the Reds aren't a team
work
that
last
walk
Sunday. Didn't work on Easter. Just saying.
I know, but that was a bullpen that blew that. I mean, they shouldn't have lost that game, right? So, I think this is one that they get right. So let's go with the Phils tonight.
Fair enough. All right, do you have one last thing for us?
We have to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays, man. 13-0 ties a major league record for modern era for best to a season. Last done by the Milwaukee Brewers in 1987, and the Atlanta Braves did it in 1982. I believe that the overall record is 14 by some team in the 1800s. I don't even really remember who it was, but do you buy it? Or is it the fact that they've played some of the worst teams in baseball?
No, I don't want to hear that at all. I don't want to hear that at all. It is hard to play consistent baseball early on in the season. We have seen this Phillies team play some mediocre opponents and spin their wheels. I mean, what they're doing right now is utterly remarkable. And not only are they just winning games, it's not like they're doing it with late game magic. I mean, they're just bludgeoning their opponents right now.
They're beating the hell out of them.
I don't know if they win the AL East. I don't know if this is a World Series team or not, but yeah, I mean, I think that they're the Rays. If this were the Tigers, if this were a lesser organization, I'd say, I don't know. Tampa Bay always finds a way to be competitive. They always find a way to, be in the mix. Yeah, I mean, it's real for sure.
I mean, I'm going to agree with you that it's real.
Like it's real in that, like, do I expect them to win 120 games? No, but.
Look, it's a great start, and I think that I think that this is the kind of start that they needed. If you got to remember when we made our predictions, I don't know. I'm not sure either one of us picked the Rays to actually make the playoffs. I think I had them at 7. Kind of start that gets you there, right? This is the kind of start that, unless barring an absolute meltdown, this is the kind of start that will get them into the playoffs. But I do say pump the brakes a little bit because I mean, yes, you're right. It's hard to win and be consistent in baseball, and it's hard to win 13 games in a row no matter who you're playing. But it was the Tigers, the Nationals, the A's, and the Red Sox, right? I mean, that's who they've played so far. So it's a little improbable, but at the same time, I go, okay. If you were beating the Yankees and the Blue Jays and the and the Astros and whoever the Guardians, then I'd be more impressed. And
a concern that they have, I mean, Jeffrey Springs has been awesome this season. Early on, had to leave the start early the other night. Looks like there's a elbow issue there. You kind of hold your breath. I mean. That will change. That will change.
That one. You know what they called that one? And it's one. It's something that I experienced. And I have nothing to do with athletics. I experienced it from typing, and it ultimately led to a surgery for me. Right, but it was an inflammation of the ulnar nerve. Yeah. That it causes tingling right in your hand, so it makes it hard to grip the baseball. Like he tried to throw a ball and he couldn't, not because there was pain, but because he just couldn't feel it. Like there was no feel because of it caused like a numbness and a tingling in your fingers. And it's usually what happened with typing. It was from leaning on the desk and leaning on the ulnar nerve and putting pressure on it that it irritated it and it got inflamed. Obviously, he had it happen for athletic purposes, and that's why he had to leave the game. But it's not like it's something that's been like, oh, it's a minor tear or anything like that. So I do.
Yeah,
think
he said he didn't feel a tear, didn't feel a pop.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. Taj Bradley, though, by the way, I mean, they bring him up. Yeah. He was awesome. Then they send him back down. It's not like there's no depth there. If they have to make a move, they have to bring him up. So go figure. The Rays.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Keep in mind that neither of those other teams that won all those games even reached the World Series. So it's no guarantee of anything. but it is a hell of a start. You know,
It's a
it
great
is
story.
impressive.
It's been fun to
Yeah.
watch. You check in on them. They got off to a tough start yesterday in Thursday game against the Red Sox. You say, okay, today's the day. And then you blink, and then it's 3-3, and then it's a 3-run homer. And you're like, my God, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll see how much longer they can keep it up. All right. Well, if you don't have anything else, it's probably time to wrap up this show. So we will be back on Monday, hopefully with something a little bit more positive, a little bit better to talk about, because this whole what's wrong with the Phillies, what can they do to fix these problems? Hopefully we just see them fix the problems and we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how things play out in Cincinnati over the weekend. Phillies still have 3 more to go with the Cincinnati Reds. For Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. Make sure that you check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us along, leave us a rating, all that good stuff, and we'll talk soon.